All right, well, we're going to be getting into chapter 4 today of Exodus. So we're going to continue the story of Moses and God, of their encounter. So I doubt we'll get to 5, but we'll see. If we do, it'll just be the first part. I'm not going to go very far into it. What happened in chapter 3? Just so we kind of get back into the swing of things of where we left off.
Bush doesn't burn.
Okay, so he came to the burning bush. And what happened at the bush?
Take off your sandals.
Take off your sandals. He's telling me on holy ground. He's kind of about to have an encounter with God. We talked about whether or not this was a Christophany or not. We're not going to go back into that discussion. But he did, however, have an encounter with God. And what was going on with the interaction?
God said he was going to come save the Israelites from the hand of Egypt and bring them up out of that. Take them to another one.
Yeah, and what was Moses' response?
Don't ask me.
Yeah, so he was sitting there in the presence of God, and he was having basically a debate, and he was saying how he wasn't good enough, and he was trying to come up with all these excuses of why not to do whatever God's calling him to do. Now, I think it's kind of funny, we talk a little bit about it, and how we actually do the same thing. So who are we to question whenever God calls us to do something, that's almost like a first natural reaction that comes from us. And God doesn't necessarily punish Moses here for that. God knows who we are, and which is a good sign. Because when we do question him or do kind of say, hey, God, not me, who am I? I don't know anything. I don't know enough of the Bible to go out and share and go do whatever. All those little excuses that we like to give God, God's patient with us. And he's like, you're cute. But what was the main reason of why God was with him? What was God's response to Moses?
That it was going to be him.
It was God all along. So he was helping Moses get to the point of understanding that God isn't using necessarily Moses as far as relying on him and his ability. He's like, Moses, I'm the one doing this. And he's going to kind of repeat this process as we go along. And that's just something good for us to remember, that when we are doing something for God or something that he has called us to do, you're not doing it of your own ability. You're doing it because God's going to give you the ability. How many times have you ever had an encounter where you were like, where in the world did that come from, or how was I able to do that? You may have something to share on one of those type of events. I mean, I know there was one time when I was talking with I'm trying to remember, it was a Mormon at my front door, Jehovah's Witness at my front door. And they knocked on the door, did what they normally did, and my first thing that I always try to do is invite them in. They won't come in. And then they start talking to me about all these different things, what Jehovah's Witnesses do. And then, I don't know where this came from. All of a sudden, this verse popped in my head. I knew where it comes from, so but when I was there, I was like, this verse came and I said, pull up this Bible, this verse. In your Bible, not mine, yours. He pulled it up and I said, what does this say? So he read it, and we did this, I don't remember what the verse is today, which is weird, okay? But I do know the context, because we're talking about Jesus being God, because that's a big deal to them. And the verse came up, and it said, basically Jesus, I think it was the I am verse when he says I am. I said, who's the I am? They're like, well, I am is God. I'm like, what is Jesus saying right here? Well, you're just trying to trick me. You read it in your own book, not mine. So you need to look at that again. And I went to another verse, and the Holy Spirit just kind of kept speaking to me through this, to the point that they got so flustered, they said, we just got to leave. And left. I'm like, good, God, I pray that the Holy Spirit will just continue in, coming upon them and sharing them. But God will do that in moments of your life where he will give you the ability to do whatever that you don't have in your power to do. Okay, and we can trust him on that. And that's kind of what's going on here with Moses. Because we're going to see God move, not Moses and Aaron. Okay? And he makes that very clear to Pharaoh as we go into this. So that's kind of a precursor to chapter 4. So let's start reading chapter 4. Let's read 1 through 9. Let's back up a little bit. What happened right before then?
The elders of Israel, are supposed to go to the king, right?
He was supposed to go to the elders, go grab them, and take them with him. Yep, absolutely. My notes are all off.
You said right before?
Yeah, right before this, because this is a continuation of where we left off.
He's just telling, I don't know this word.
Oh, no, they got silver and gold from the Egyptians.
Correct.
Yeah.
He's just telling them that, hey, you're about to get plundered, they're gonna plunder them.
Yeah, so God basically gives them a very 10,000 foot view of what's going to happen. He just tells them this is what's going to happen. And so now Moses is now responding to this.
Tells them, I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward you, which is amazing.
Absolutely it is. And boy, does he do this. Okay, so let's read 4, 1 through 9. Would somebody like to read that?
Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was leprous, like snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground."
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so Moses asks this question, what if they do not believe me? Who's he referring to?
The elders. No, but, wait.
No,
That's
his
that
own people.
His own people. So Moses' issue right now is, what if we're in chapter 4, by the way, that's it, okay? What if my people don't even know or won't listen to me? What if they don't believe me with what I'm saying? So he was like, look, I'm going to show you some signs to show them so that you will do this, or so that they will believe you. And very interesting sign. So what's the first sign that he gives them?
Leprosy?
Snake. So do you think, knowing Moses' last 40 years, where was he?
Wilderness.
Midian. And what was he doing?
Sheep.
He was a shepherd. He was out there out in the wilderness, kind of tending the sheep. Do you think he saw snakes?
Yeah,
Probably.
plenty of times.
I think he knows his snakes after 40 years of being out there. This is very interesting to me because we're not told what kind of a snake it turned into, but I'm going to allude into some things. First off, what was Moses' reaction whenever he threw the staff onto the ground?
Ran.
He ran. Why did he run?
Out of the snake.
This is a very dangerous snake you recognize.
Yeah, it wasn't just any snake. He recognized that it was a dangerous snake. And he didn't want any part of it. So what kind of snake would it maybe have been?
Cobra
Cobra.
or something.
So,
Guard.
It's a guard snake. A viper. Yeah, so it's believed that it was like a king cobra. Because when you go back, and a lot of this you have to remember is tied back to Egyptian. The king cobra was a very prominent figure in them. That's what it was like. It was a sign of power. It was a sign of authority and that kind of a thing. And so these signs to Moses and to the people, it could have been, we don't know this. Okay, so we could be reading some things into this. But when he threw that in the ground, some people think that was a sign of, hey, this is a representation of Egypt. And you're going to be the one taking it by the tail, or through me, but this is what's going to happen because of the way the king cobra vision was. Okay? So we recognize that Moses knew it, but then what I found it very interesting is that how did God tell him to pick it up? By the tail. How do we typically, I mean, have you ever seen snake holders and
Isn't
stuff?
that how Steve Irwin does it? Puts it up by the tail and then it kind of.
No, it's dangerous to approach by the tail.
Yeah.
You gotta
Grab
grab the
by the
head.
head and the neck.
Train people, and like,
Yeah, so I did some research on this. Typically, you don't pick it up by the tail. If you're just trying to kind of get it out of the way, it's okay to do the tail as long as you're quick, because by the tail, it can still turn around and snap you.
yeah.
Okay? Depending on the snake, you can actually pick it up by the midsection, but if you're gonna hold the snake, you're gonna hold it by the head. But God here says, I want you to take this venomous snake that you know very well, that you just ran from, I want you to pick it up by its tail. What do you think he was doing to Moses during this time?
Come by faith, like.
Yeah, he's testing his faith. He's like, where are you? Do you believe me that I'm in control of this whole situation? Because you've already questioned me several times here. He goes, now I want you to believe me. And what was the staff? What did the staff help him do?
It's interchanged as rod and staff, and later on we will read that God's staff or God's rod, and in Hebrew it's like just one single word, bucket.
By
Oh,
help them
protection
shepherd.
or,
Protection.
or if they had a crook on it, you can pull them.
Yeah.
Look at that, like even the Egyptian pharaoh has a staff, shepherd's staff.
A staff is protection when you're out there. You want something to either guard against they had other animals that were attacking the sheep, stuff like that. The one item that he had for protection, he just threw it down on the ground. Almost laying down what your worldly ideas and your worldly, what you consider protection. I want you to lay it down, and I'm going to make it something this. So he had to lay that down, almost like it's like kind of a mental game with Moses. And then he had to go back and then pick it up and turn right back into a staff. So pretty cool. So definitely some underlying meanings going on.
Did you look up how big these snakes are? They're big.
They get big.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how big this. It was big enough to where Moses. It wasn't a baby. Okay. I mean, it was at least the size of the staff.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Have y'all been around rattlesnakes?
Stepped on one
Wait,
once.
they get 4 or 5 feet?
We went dove hunting one time, and it was 8 feet long,
Oh, wow.
and it was about that thick around.
Rattlers?
Rattler.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I heard so many shotguns going off at one time. But so yeah, snakes get big. So God was working through him, and we also have to remember Egypt and what they believed on things. They were basically controlled by satanic gods, satanic beings, that kind of deal. So this was also God saying, hey, no matter what's going on over there in Egypt, I'm bigger than them. I need you to remember that. Okay? So when we get to this whole God's deal with Egypt, don't take this lightly. When we get to the magicians of the time, don't take that lightly. They weren't doing parlor tricks. They weren't David Copperfields of their time. They were doing magic. They were doing some of the same things that God was doing. Okay? And the only way they were able to do that, because they were connected to higher beings on a demonic level. Okay? So yeah, I'm going there. We'll get there. But I just want to give you a kind of a precursor to that. Okay, so that was test number 1. What was test 2?
Yeah.
Health and sickness.
Yeah, I call it the Napoleon test. Put his hand in his jacket, pull it out. What was wrong with it?
Leprosy.
Yeah, I was going to put pictures of leprosy on here, but I was like, let's not do that. It comes in different forms. We don't really know what leprosy that we're talking about here, because it's all kind of different. It could be a malformity in the hand. It could just be a rash on the hand. It could be all different variations of that. All we know, but leprosy was typically not a good thing, and God is sitting here going, hey, I can create this, but what else can you do?
Can heal it.
He put it back in his hands and he pulled it out and he was healed. So he's really showing God's ability to even over the diseases of the land, or diseases that are out there. He goes, I'm in control of everything. Okay? And then what was the third one?
Water into blood.
Yeah. Now he didn't tell him to do this. He just kind of instructed him to do this test. Okay, Okay, so in his test, what he said to do was just, wait, when you get there, take some water out of the Nile, pour it out on the ground, and it's going to turn to what? Blood. This was him also demonstrating his power over nature. Okay, because the Nile, if you remember from a previous one, the Egyptians had a god over the Nile. We're going to get to that more when we get to the 10 plagues. But the Israelites knew about this too. So this was a sign to them going, hey, guys, don't worry about it. I'm bigger than even that little god that they worship. Kind of a deal, okay? So he goes through these tests to help Moses out. Let me see. You know, what I find interesting is in 3:18, God already told Moses everything that was going to happen. But yet he still goes through this whole spiel of helping him through this thing. And I'm just like, what a patient God we have. You know, and that even through our insecurities and through all the struggles that we tend to go through and not understanding and stuff like that, he is still very patient with us. And I think that is that's very refreshing. Okay? So, anything else in that chapter you want to cover?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, again, I said it last week, that we just have to keep in mind that, you know, 400 years has passed, right? And they don't have synagogue. They don't have, you know, the law. They don't have the Torah. That, you know, all they basically know are just stories from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And who knows how often they hear those. And so they're surrounded by, you know, these idol worshipers. And so we just have to keep that in mind when we're going through this.
No, absolutely. It's a good point, Dan. Thank you.
I think a precedent is set here. In 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about how the Jews seek for a sign, the Greeks look for wisdom. Here, God is saying, I'm going to give you these two signs, and if those aren't enough, here's a third one. And I think this is the beginning of where the Jews begin to seek for signs. They see this as God.
That's good. Well, and I kind of put down here is like we're getting ready because there's about to be the battle of the gods going on. I really say it's not really a battle. As it is a spanking, I should say. You know, kind of a deal.
It's more like a sovereign, like who's sovereign.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to get more into that in chapter 5 when Moses actually gets to Pharaoh.
We mentioned also 18, and I went back and looked at it. It's interesting to me because in 18, God is saying the elders are going to go. But it turns out to be just Moses and Aaron. So Moses has to have a tremendous amount of courage because even his own elder people, they don't believe God, but he does.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that. He does go to his people, and they do end up believing. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. Well, let's read 10 through 17. Would somebody like to read that one besides me?
Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. But Moses said, O Lord, please send us someone else to do it. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you to speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, and if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so I can perform miraculous signs with it.
Thank you. So, what's going on here?
I think Moses is afraid because he still has, he knows that he was, Pharaoh is upset and wants to kill him. And I think God was upset, although he knew it was going to happen, right? But that wasn't the way it's supposed to be. Aaron was not supposed to be part of this deal, right? Moses was supposed to be a representation of Jesus, but Aaron and the priesthood was added into it, but Moses was supposed to be both. So I think that's why it was a little upsetting, because, it took away from, what Jesus is going to be.
Yeah. So I do think God is starting to get maybe a little bit irritated with Moses. Like, hey, bud, I need you to move along a little bit further here. What I just did, was that not enough to show my power? And now you're going to sit here and come up with one more excuse for this? What was Moses' excuse?
He just doesn't speak well.
He doesn't speak well. What do we typically believe about Moses?
Speech well.
Even though we got corrected, we all think he's a prince, so he must have all the formalities of education, speech, presentation.
Yeah, what did you say, Becca? So it's largely believed that Moses was a stutterer. That's what they think there was a speech impediment. Somebody pull up Acts 7:22. Somebody want to read it if you have it?
Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action.
Doesn't sound like a stutterer. So Stephen's saying this about Moses. So how do we put these two together then?
Doesn't want
It's an
to be
excuse.
cooperative.
It's what?
It's just an excuse.
You
Could
could-
just give an excuse,
Right?
period. He was afraid, sure. He didn't want to do it.
just being devil's advocate from us.
No, it's okay.
Powerful in speech, I mean, you could still have an impediment that the content of what you say could have great weight or great meaning or great impact, even with an impediment, so.
Yeah, no,
I'm
absolutely.
not saying-
I'm not yet.
Yeah,
I understand. And the whole stuttering thing is a guess. Here's what I think it is. How long has he been away from Egypt?
Years.
If you don't use a language after an extended period of time, do you tend to lose it a little bit?
Yeah.
So his ability to speak, one, the Israelite language, also the Egyptian language, has probably diminished, and he's not well versed enough that he feels to be able to speak to them.
I think it's fear. I mean, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
First of all, he looks like Charlton Heston. I mean, come on. You know. But he was, Stephen says he was eloquent. There's no reason why he wouldn't be. He learned 2 languages. He was terrified. Even though he could pick up snakes and even though he could turn water into blood, he was still scared.
Absolutely. And I'm not taking any away from his attitude on this man, on this whole thing. But in his own mind, look, I'm not the man to be able to speak like I used to speak. God, and he's just coming up with any excuse that he can. As we all do.
I mean, perhaps that's why God chose them. Sometimes if someone's very eloquent in their speech, you kind of gloss over it. It just goes in, but it doesn't sink in. And then when you hear speakers who take time to pause, it really makes an impact on what you have to say.
I guess to put it in our content, it'd be like God asking us to go to Beijing and petition the Chinese government for all Christians to be released from China.
Do you think it's also,
Absolutely.
sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think it's also maybe God is upset because Moses isn't getting the point that it's not about Moses and his eloquence. It's about God's power and glory.
Oh, absolutely. And I think 11 kind of screams that. Because I put this down as, this is God treating Moses like Job. This is a Job moment for Moses, because he goes, hey, who has made man's mouth? Who are you to say anything about basically your speech? And who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? I mean, he kind of gives him a little spanking here. To say, who are you to question what you can do when it's me that's doing it?
Yeah, but it doesn't work because then Moses says, hey, send somebody else, will you? I mean,
Moses is a little hard-headed. Which is, I do believe why Dan is right, that this was not, having Aaron along the side was not necessarily the path that he wanted to take. And this is a pattern that we will see with Moses as we continue the story. Moses will do this again, and this will actually cause him not to enter the promised land.
That's what you get for being an introvert.
Well, man, an introvert or just not following God, doing what he tells you. Because God was very specific on things here. Because Moses is a type of Jesus. And when you don't do something that God is trying to set up for the future, God's not going to be happy about that. We'll get to that. That's later on in Exodus, so stay tuned.
I think there's also two other things that I was thinking about that, for me, that's impactful, because I can tend to be like Moses. I'm not well-spoken, softer voice. But when it talks about the anger of the Lord was kindled, how many times has his anger been kindled against me for my reluctance to do something he's asking me to do? So that's one thing. But the second thing I think is interesting is that God is the one that came with a solution. He said, okay, well, here's Aaron, and so his solution is always perfect. You know what I mean? So even though we have these things in our lives that we claim we cannot do, he will provide a solution in one way or another, whether it's through someone else or giving us the power, the ability to do it. So that's just a couple things I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, it's good. And we're going to get to that here in just a second too, because there's a little more to that. But so,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I had another thought on this too. As far as when did God's anger was kindled when he had to come up. So God's original plan was like, okay, Moses, you're gonna be the one, and he's patient with Moses, even with all like the pushback, but when God has to like come up with another plan, that's when his anger, like he was patient as long as he was on the original path of God's design or God's plan, but it wasn't until they kind of deviated from that original plan that God's anger was kindled.
yeah,
But they still went to the end result.
yeah.
Well, it kind of goes to, the sequences. Moses was afraid. He wasn't obedient. And then God has to give him a reproof. And, it's no different than us.
Correct.
Or raising our children. Our children are afraid to do something because, for whatever reason, they don't think they can. The second, we encourage them they can, but there's a little fear, and then we take them into the next step of, no, you need to obey. And that's just the cycle. We all do it.
Absolutely.
But Moses was doing it directly in front of the Lord.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So Ryan, I hate to add more. I know we're all kind of.
No, it's good.
But it's interesting when you look back at the history. So something incredible happened in Genesis 12 with Abraham's calling, and God tells him, "I'm pulling you from this land. I'm going to take you over here, and I'm going to give this to your ancestors." That whole vision was lost by this point. Hundreds of years have passed. We know that those stories were probably passed down. We know that Joseph said, "Hey, when we go back to that land, make sure you take my bones." But man, how many generations had passed over this time? And they had gotten used to being Egyptians and being slaves. That was all they knew. That whole vision that was given to some man 400 and some odd years ago about coming out of this land and taking over this other land, it was gone. So I guess I'm being Moses' advocate here in a little bit, because he's like, really? You want me to go back to these people that have completely forgotten the whole plan you had for them? And tell them, hey, we're still doing this?
Game on!
Yeah. So, it's hard. Imagine, how many changes happen from one generation to the next. They lose things. That's why I think in the scripture, he's always like, hey, I want you to read this stuff constantly. I want you to pass it on to the next generation. I want you guys to write this over the doors, I want you to put it on your foreheads. It's a constant reminder because we forget.
Absolutely.
And so how much forgetting took place over 400 and some odd years.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
after 40 years, I would say that Moses was pretty much in his comfort zone. And at 80 years old, He kind of cruising around to retirement. I don't want to go anywhere. Yeah, he's very comfortable with the environment, the sheep, the wife, and the kids.
Yeah.
You know, peaceful like to retire.
I'm on the last stage.
You're gonna work till you're 80 years old?
That's what I was gonna say. I think too, just a reminder that God equips us to do what He's called us to do. But so many times we have to be pushed out of our comfort zone. Because I'm not gonna volunteer to go do that. Like, no. And in our weakness, He is strong. So usually I think He wants to use us in our weakness because we can't gloat about it. It wasn't us. It was totally Him doing that thing through us. We cannot take the glory for that.
Absolutely. And that pattern continues through all Scripture. Because when Jesus called the disciples, they were fishermen. Okay? Keep that in mind.
In the spirit of good conversation, I think that this begs the question though, what if he had obeyed God, on that side? Like, what if he had so much faith, he just did it, like, and he'll never know, and we'll never know.
And you know what? What's interesting? God knew he wasn't going to have the faith. That didn't catch God by surprise at all. And we know that because this next section here of what he did with Aaron. Okay?
Well, another thing, I'm sorry, I'm dragging it out too, but Moses has been taught and taught and taught and taught, and he still doesn't get it. He still doesn't have enough faith. He still doesn't believe God can do those kinds of things. But the other side of that is that God has worked on him all these decades, and He's going to use it. And so He's made him the man that He needs him to be. That doesn't mean he's not perfect, but God has created in him what He wants to see used to bring His people out of this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it interesting, through all the objections, God doesn't let Moses off the hook. He's like, look, dude, you're it. One way or the other, this is it. And, then Moses, he's like, look, please just send me a helper. Send me somebody. And God's like, oh, gosh, dude. Okay. I'm going to send you your brother Aaron. Where is Aaron?
On his way to you.
At this point in time, Aaron has already started the journey to meet God at the mountain of God, which we're going to read here in a little bit.
One great thing, how you compared Moses and Jesus. We never see Jesus contemplate God's direction ever. And that's probably a thing, perhaps obvious, but not obvious enough. And
That's the reason, like, Moses is a servant in the house of God, whereas Yeshua, Jesus is the son of God in the house of God.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of what I was getting to. So God had already known how Moses was going to respond to this whole thing. In preparation of that, God had already told Aaron, hey, dude, I need you to start a journey. If that doesn't help us understand, God knows everything that's going to happen. He knows how you're going to respond. It doesn't catch Him off guard. So don't beat yourself up whenever we act like that. When we kind of, are hesitant on things. God understands, God knows, and God knows exactly what you need in order to get the job done. And He's already putting those plans into action before you even do. He told Aaron to do this way before He told Moses, okay, I'll send Aaron. He's like, but I've already done it. So God is working so many puzzle pieces ahead of what you can even imagine of what's going on. Keep that in mind when this world is unraveling before our eyes. Okay, we could let this whole thing just beat us down and make us worried or hopeless and things like that. God has so many chess pieces out there moving. His will is going to be done no matter what. And that is good news. Okay? So, let me see here. So then he tells Moses, look, Aaron's going to come. I'm going to speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with you in your mouth, and I will instruct you, and he will do what he says. Moreover, he shall speak for you to the people, and he will become as a mouth to you, and you will become as God to him. What in the world is that little phrase?
serious responsibility.
Yeah.
I
think they kind of understood this a little better because they saw how important it was to be a messenger for a king. We don't really get that in our modern times. You know, when a king would say, hey, you're gonna go and you're gonna be my representative, with the words you say are gonna be my words and they will carry authority, they would send out these messengers. It's the same thing. This is kind of like the first institution of a real prophet.
Yeah.
Who carries the message with authority of the real authority.
Absolutely. Keep in mind, this wasn't, Moses was on a mission, but God was, my gosh, I hate when that happens. John said, he was giving him authority. And the people are going to view him with that authority. So this wasn't just a light task. This was a big deal. Okay, that was, what we've already said. Huge responsibility. Is the first prophet mouthpiece for God. And it's going to be huge here. Tara, I wrote down here, this is the first Bruce Almighty. I gave him some authority there. Joe, what Bruce Almighty? Let's read 8. Let's finish this chapter. Let's go ahead and read it because it is all one story here. So would somebody like to read 18 through 31? I know it's long, but you can do it.
Actually, it says, like, my mind says, he shall be Elohim instead of Elohim. It doesn't say, like, you shall be God to them. Rather, it says instead of Elohim.
Which is kind of similar. But he's not going to be God, but by no means is he going to be God. And he can't be. But he will have the authority of God. Because God's going to give that to him.
We all go to God for every reason. Like, God is giving a prayer, hey, you can approach this guy. Instead of me for temporary sake,
Yeah.
So instead of God, you can approach him. So it's like he's keeping a representative there.
Yeah. Dan, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say again that Pharaoh and probably a lot of the Israelites, they didn't know God, right? They didn't know who God was. So he was just saying, look, you're going to be. I mean, Pharaoh was considered a god, right, and an Elohim to the people, and I mean that was his position. But I think that's what he's saying is, hey, you're going to be mightier because of me. And I think that's what he was saying. Not necessarily you're going to be Yahweh to him. It's just going to be you're going to be a god.
Yeah, well, that's good. Okay, Vicky, you want to go ahead and read this thing?
Mm-hmm. Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive." Jethro said, "Go, and I wish you well." Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. The Lord said to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then say to Pharaoh, 'This is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son.' At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. 'Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me,' she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time she said bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. The Lord said to Aaron, 'Go into the desert to meet Moses.' So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the miraculous signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped."
Okay. Any questions you have in this whole section? Okay, before we get to the obvious one. Okay, so what's going on up here, like in the first, I think this is kind of very interesting how Moses treats Jethro, shows a sign of respect. He said, he goes to Jethro and says, "Hey, Father," he goes, "Hey, I need your approval to go to Egypt. This is what's happened." And Jethro's like, "Man, dude, go," because he's taking his daughter, and they're going to Egypt. Okay, probably not the safest place to be. for them, okay? And then he says, go, return to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life is dead. So he's trying to put him at ease. He, let him know that, hey, the people that wanted you dead are no longer there, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about that piece of it, okay? So he took his wife's sons, they mounted the donkeys, they started returning to Egypt, which I find very interesting, because we see that picture somewhere at some point in the future.
Actually, the rod of Moses changed to rod of Elohim. See the transition there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe when he cast the rod down, it doesn't belong to him anymore because the Lord took over.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the reason it's the transition.
Yeah, that's
Even
good.
in like Psalm 33, say like thy rod is, it's like, what is that? Like the
They
old
rod
say
and
that,
stuff, they comfort me.
comfort me.
Okay, and then he continues on, just retelling him, and y'all, this is Yahweh talking. He says, when you go to Egypt, see to it that the miraculous wonders which I put in your hand, you do them before Pharaoh, but as for me, I will harden his heart with strength, so that he will not let my people go. That was my first question.
Hardening the heart.
He hardens the Pharaoh's heart.
This comes with so many things. In Jeremiah, he's the potter. And Romans 9:18 says, like, I will give mercy to those he wished to give mercy, and harden those he wants to harden.
Then he says, you killed my firstborn son, so I'm going to kill yours.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in a second. Yeah, absolutely. So hold on to that thought.
But he's a potter, so he can change the hearts, like, do I not have the liberty to change it? Like, he questions Jeremiah, right?
Well, I struggled with this at first too, as far as the hardening, but is God not justified in like, now it's time, I'm gonna pour out my wrath on you because you made my people suffer? So is it not, I struggle with that because I'm like, why would God?
You and
it's like,
theologians for centuries.
yeah.
So if one of the questions that comes to mind, okay, so God hardened his heart, so did Pharaoh have the opportunity to do the right thing?
He had
Yeah.
the opportunity, and he also hardened so many times, like 80 to 20 times you'll see it in the Bible that Pharaoh gets his hard-hearted. Sometimes it is due to the pride, due to God, and the other times it's by his own free will.
Yeah. Dan, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, it's not. We don't have to look at like a predestination that he was going to like Pharaoh was condemned to death. But in the New Testament, it's like that. When people trade the truth for the lie, they choose willfully to not believe in God, willfully to go against the evidence. Then God gives them what they want. He does not go against the will, but his will ultimately be done because he's Yahweh and he's providential hand is on everything, and his glory will shine in the end, and his will be done. But people choose not to believe, so God gives them what they want.
So even in Revelations, 11 and 16, where it talks about people shook their fist to God and cursed God, and Revelation 11, this is no different in my mind from that standpoint. You go through all of this, yet they still refuse God. And it's what to your point earlier, do you not think he knows this already?
Yeah, so we have to keep in mind, there are times in scripture when it is not linear, like it is not like time code, it goes right in line with one another, okay? You have to kind of see the big picture here. He was telling Moses at this time, this is what's going to happen. At some point, I'm going to harden his heart. He is not filling in all the details of what transpired before that part.
Or after.
Okay? So, if we really continue reading the whole scripture, all of the whole story, the word hardened is used 20 times. 10 times it's referring to the God being the author of the hardening, and 10 times is Pharaoh himself hardening his own heart. So he had a part in this whole plan. So it's not like God didn't give him an option, but every time that he chose to disobey God, God says, I'm going to harden you just a little bit more, bud.
Also, that you have to look back and look at what Pharaoh has been given. He's been given this miraculous family that comes out of nowhere and changes the whole way, stops stops the problems that were happening, you know, where people were gonna die, where they didn't have any food, they didn't have anything. And here come the Jews, and they basically reclaim all of Pharaoh's power, authority, and boom, they did this amazing thing. So why would he harden his heart to that? He's very hard-headed in the way he responds. So there's some justification.
God has given him exactly what he wants. It's his own free will to choose to obey or disobey when Yahweh comes to him and talks to him. Even after signs after signs after signs, he still chose not to believe and obey.
There's also the facet of this of how did God use that for his good? Perhaps every
we'll
time
get to
his
that.
heart was hardened, the Israelites groaned and cried out to God, which is what the whole purpose of this was, right? To like de-Egyptize them and to turn them towards God.
You know, it did, and you know, so is God still in the hardening business today?
In the New Testament, we see that he gave them over to strong delusion because they did not love the truth.
Yeah, Romans 1.
God
Look at
uses
those Iranian
God
people,
uses the
those
evil
turkey
for the end
bags, I mean.
times. We have seen it in New Testament.
He's done it now through Egypt, or through Israel. That's why Israel has a hard time understanding of what the big picture is going on, because their hearts are hardened. They have scales over their eyes. God has placed that upon them. He is still in the hardening business. So, if that's the case, how do we internalize that?
He's God, period.
And he can do what he does.
That's exactly what he wants to do.
That's exactly.
We just need
However,
to
we have a play in this. When we choose to disobey God and continue in our own ways, how much of the hardening is going on in our own hearts when we tend to do that? And that ought to frighten us, put the fear of God in us that much more. Because I don't ever want to be in a position where my heart is so hardened to sin that I don't even see it as sin anymore. And this is just a picture of what's going on with Pharaoh. So when it says he hardened his heart, this is the ultimate end of what will happen to Pharaoh. It is not the process. We get the process as we dig deeper. But this same process is going on within our own selves if we're not careful.
I think what you're saying, because I struggle sometimes with this too, but you gotta come back to he's God. You know, in the situation, hardening or whatever. There was a YouTube video that I was watching of Cliff Netchell, some of you may know him about, he goes off to college campuses and shares the gospel. And one girl asked the question, she was asking about Adolf Hitler. If Hitler would have repented before he died, you know, it's kind of interesting, she asked the question, and he knew what she was asking because how dare God would have saved him. And he says, yes, if he would have repented, yes, because this is what Christ did on the cross. However, you think about it, this is what you're saying, is that Hitler's mind, after he killed, slaughtered all those people, his mind is seared. He's saying statistically, it's not a good chance that Hitler would have said, I repent, I'm sorry for what I did. It's not going to happen. Your question is that we don't know when the other person is going to go left or right. We don't know. Our job is to share. You know what I mean? God knows ultimately. And this is what Cliff was saying, the same thing. But there's some point in time where your heart's hardened and we don't know when that's gonna occur and you're not gonna turn anymore. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But this is the problem, is that with God, rather than trust God, we want to question God. Why God? Why God? Sometimes God will tell us, but a lot of times he doesn't. And this hardening is the same thing. We want to know why God. And God, no one in the scriptures does say God is obligated to tell us when and why he does something.
Right.
I think he already answered that for us, right? It's for his good and for his
yeah.
purpose. And sometimes we cannot surrender to the fact that it's not about us, you know?
It's our free will, like, you know, once you harden yourself, your free will, it becomes like what God said to Cain. Like sin is crouching on your door if you don't repent.
Yeah.
He gives an option.
He does.
A lot of this is anthropomorphism. I mean, God was going to destroy the earth, and then when the flood came along, and he changed his mind, or theoretically changed his mind. God doesn't change his mind. He's God. He's the way he is all the time. And he's dealing with Israel and with Moses and with the Egyptians. They are the most powerful entity on the face of the earth. They're incredibly powerful. And here's the head of that who thinks he's God, when God is telling him, no, you're not. And that's what's going on there. And that's a story for all of us, for all time. You can look back on that and see what God has done to this guy who's brilliant and, has all the power he could have.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to move on because we got another big topic coming up. Okay, so first off, I want to make sure we cover this, as it's already been mentioned. He tells, this is what you're going to tell Pharaoh. He goes, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go that he may serve me. But you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your first son.
He's telling ahead of time.
He's telling it. And what did a Pharaoh previous to him do at one point? Killing sons. Okay? God hadn't forgotten. This is almost blood for blood. And he's like, I'm going to remember this, but you need to know that these people are my firstborn. And I will protect them, and they are mine, and this is a serious matter. So he's letting them know this. He goes, you kill them, I'm coming after yours. Okay? God's not playing around here. Anything else on that one before you get to the...
Yeah, I would say this is also, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go Dan.
Well, I would just say this is also, it's spiritual warfare as well, right? You go back to Genesis 3 and the whole, the seed of the woman and the seed of Satan. So I think it harkens back to that as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that.
I wonder if this seems so harsh to people because we don't see a listing of all the laws like we do after all of this. And all of those ways that God may have prescribed to the Israelites were forgotten.
At this point?
Yes. That's why they're in Egypt, because they're acting like Egyptians. And after this...
Well, it's not why they were in Egypt. They went to Egypt for protection.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
The point that I'm making is it may seem hard, so later on in the Bible, we see that if you commit certain sins, certain consequences happen for you.
Through the law.
Exactly, and to me this looks exactly like God's character that we see spelled out or specified as we go forward after this book of the Bible. So it may seem harsh to us, but it may be the way things are if you were for the land, right? That's the law of God, and we don't see that spelled out in Genesis.
I mean, his ways don't change. They weren't spelled out yet, but God doesn't mean God doesn't kind of still keep his own ways. But at this point, the law has not been given and the people did not know anything about it yet. But I do understand what you're saying. It's the character of God that we're looking at more so than anything else at this point.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So that's good. Okay. God, they're on their way to Egypt. Moses has just gone through a huge testing of his faith, saw God at the burning bush, spoke to him, went through all these trials, did all these wonders, he's had all this time with God, he's done all this. Finally, Moses says, okay, I'm going to go. You brought me here, and we're just going to trek forward and go to Egypt. And they're making their way to Egypt, and now all of a sudden God said, I'm going to go kill you. He was on his way to kill Moses. If that shouldn't raise some flags, I don't know what will.
What did Moses do?
Because he forgot the Abrahamic covenant.
Absolutely. So
full-time Midianite.
This is very odd, but this lets us know how serious God is with his covenants. Okay? This is not a light thing to God. The covenant that God made with Abraham was a big one. Which one was it? Circumcision. He was very clear. He goes, if you do not circumcise, you will be cut off in another sense. You are to be cast aside from my tribe. That was the deal. That was the covenant. That does not go away just because Moses is where they're from. This idea of circumcision is still in place with them. And Moses, for whatever reason, chose not to circumcise one of his sons.
he became a Midianite almost.
But for some reason, Zipporah knows. How did she know?
That's, I know.
Because they all were worshiping, kind of like, they're also part of Abraham, right? They might be knowing, but.
So
All I could see is like she's converting to Judaism, kind of.
one of the ideas that Midianite tradition was to circumcise the groom the night before the marriage.
Or 14th year, 15th year, here the circumcision.
Okay, so it's believed that he kept one of his sons uncircumcised to please the Midianite people. That's believed. The speculation, I get it, I don't know. But why would he do one and not the other? Maybe he was trying to appease both sides. One, he circumcised one when he was supposed to. One, he left alone to say, hey guys, work with me here. I'm giving you 50-50. I don't know. That's just one idea there. But you're right. Zipporah knew enough of what the issue was. So it is one of the problems that theologians have is what was the mindset of Zipporah through all of this? Was she mad at Moses for not doing this? Or was she trying to now just okay because now she sees kind of the error and now she's fixing the problem?
She may have been afraid for him. I mean, it's clear from 26 that it's referring to circumcision. So she knew what the problem was, and she may have been terrified that if he didn't do what God told him to do, he was going to have a problem.
Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
She's
She may be submitting and giving her son to Moses' ways, because if that child wasn't circumcised, look what happened to Ishmael. When we look at Abraham's family, he went on and created his own ways, and so if this child was going to, mix cultures, and now it's like she's devoting him to the ways of Moses.
So what does this whole bridegroom of blood to me mean?
Actually, when I read it in Hebrew, it is like R-rated. I can't say that, but I mean, in English, it's like really polished.
I mean, some people say that what she was saying was, hey, I see what the issue is. Kind of like what Brady was saying. I see what the issue is. I am now getting things back in control. I'm saving your life. Not only are you getting back in covenant with God, but now we are now back in a good covenant with one another because now we are right again. That's one thought.
She's upset. Like she's calling him as bloody husband.
Yeah, and some think that she was just so mad at him for not doing something that he should have done, and some think that Moses was kind of not being the man of the house like he was supposed to be and taking control and doing what he was supposed to do to begin with. And so she was mad that she was having now to do this. And so she takes the flint knife and
She wants all of her sons under the covenant, not just some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them. She may have recognized the importance of the covenant in a way that he didn't.
So a lot of people believe that she did this, she touched his feet because Moses was bedridden at this point, that he was about to die. And she did this, but to your point, that she was really upset. Somehow she knew it. It's not disclosed here, but she knew it. She did this, and then obviously he gets better.
But the word for feet is different. You can interpret that to a different thing. That's the reason that I said it's R-rated.
The Septuagint says that Zipporah said, "The blood of the circumcision of my child is accomplished," instead of saying you're the bridegroom of blood. So I think that she was like, okay, this was a problem.
And not just that, he didn't act like a spiritual leader in his own home. So, she has to take the role and pick the stone.
Yeah, I think this was Moses' responsibility, not hers too.
Yeah.
So she had to step in. I think that's clear.
So, what I'll say is after I was doing some studying on it, the Hebrew or the Israelites really have an issue with this story. And it's because of how the word to cut off is translated. Okay? So, it's translated, and typically when you're talking about a circumcision, the word that they typically use is, let me find it again. It's because the word in here is correct, K-A-R-E-T, okay? And this is where the rabbis kind of scratch their head, because this word means to cut off. Okay, so a normal word for this. But every time that the act of circumcision is used, it's called Brit Milah. So in their minds, they're like, well, if this was an act of the covenant, why didn't they use Brit Milah? Why did they use Karat? And so it is believed she wasn't trying to get the covenant back in place. She was just going through the action because she knew that's what needed to happen. So it wasn't her covenant. It was just going through what Moses maybe couldn't have done on his own. And so it's very odd when the wordplay, when you kind of look at it. Okay? Regardless, Moses was not in alignment with what God wanted him to do. God said, you need to fix this before you move on, because I need you to be completely aligned with me before we go into this place. And God was correcting. He was putting things back in alignment in order for them to go. To me, that's how it was done. And he finally, at this, why did he wait so long? Only God knows. Okay? But that's what was going on. Anything else in there?
Do you know how old the son was?
Supposed to be 8 days after.
I mean, that's when it was supposed to, but I think he was in his teens, or no, how old was he? No, he was older than that.
Was this Gershom or?
Gershom. I think it was Gershom.
But he's not the first older person to be circumcised either.
It's not like he was 80, that's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. So here's a strong, if Moses was to speak for God regarding the covenant made with Abraham, because that's what he's doing when he's going to Egypt. Abraham made this covenant, or God made a covenant with Abraham about how long people are going to be here, and then I'm going to pull them out. This was a covenant. And now he's saying, look, if you're going to talk to me, if I'm going to talk through you about this covenant, you need to be in right covenant with me. And this is where he goes with this, okay? I think it's kind of interesting that his life was saved by the shedding of another's blood too. Because God was going to kill him. And someone's blood had to be shed in order for him to save him at this point.
Did you see, it's ironic that God calls him, knowing all of this is not right. But chooses to deal with it. You know, like, we would want to deal with it first, like, let's get right and then move forward. But God, no, we'll move forward and we'll get it right.
Yeah, isn't that,
it
kind of sounds interesting, like salvation.
Yeah.
You know, kind of God accepts you for who you are and where you are, but yet through the process after that, after the calling, he's going to clean some things up. So the whole, if you want to put things into some kind of a formula, God calls you where you are. You don't clean yourself up first. He calls you where you are, then God starts the sanctification of cleaning you up. And then, you know.
Well, it says in Genesis 17, any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He's broken my covenant. So it's strong.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing, and then we gotta finish it up.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, in verse 26, she's saying, like, you know, I know she uses the word karat before. Here they're using mulat. You know, mulat is like it means circumcision.
I mean, it's still going through the act of it.
Yeah.
But the other one is more about the covenant of the act.
No, that looks like an action, and this is the process name.
Yeah.
So that's the reason they use that. But I mean, it's the same.
Okay, let's go to this last part. Now, again, this is believed that this is out of time sync here, that God had done this way back before, and that way Aaron could start making his way from Egypt over to Midian, okay? Because he goes, go meet Moses in the wilderness. So he went and encountered him at the mountain of God and kissed him. So he met Moses where?
Mountain of God.
Yeah, or Mount Sinai, however you want to call it. He met him at Sinai. And if we remember where Sinai was, it was all the way across in the Arabian Peninsula. Okay? Moses then shared with Aaron all the words that God had given to him and all the signs that he commanded to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered all the elders of the sons of Israel. So they went back over to Egypt now. And they said, here's the elders. They performed the signs that God told them to perform. And what happened? They believed. And what did they do?
Bow down and worship.
They bowed down and worshiped. So I really like the point in 31. So the people believed and they heard that Yahweh cared about the sons of Israel. Their cries that were going out all this time, God now has answered. And that kind of restores their hope and things. Keep that in mind because they have, God has spoken to them and answered a prayer. We'll see how they respond later. Okay? Any other thoughts before we close this chapter?